So, React, right? We got here. I don't know if you guys read anything about React, but if you didn't, it's also okay. So there is this website that it's owned by React, and they have all the documentation there. It's reactjs.org. It's not that hard to find out. And I would recommend you to go through the website a little bit. They have a lot of interactive stuff you can change. A lot of things.
Incorrect stuff, you said? No.
No.
Interactive?
A lot interactive.
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 Okay. I was like, you guys were saying, what? Incorrect stuff?
No, it's interactive. That if you change, it changes stuff there. And they also have like small tutorials and whatnot. And the one thing why you could use their website is that it's up to date, because again, React is it's a library, and it's a very big community, and it keeps changing. Every year there is something new, or I think this year actually there was nothing new, but last year it was insane and a lot of things changed. So a lot of the documentation that is now on our program might be a bit not what's happening right now, but it's also good to understand how things worked before. Mm-hmm. Because again, a lot of people use React for a long time. So whenever you get a job, sometimes you might look at code that it's a bit old. So it's also good to understand what things we're doing. And I'm gonna try to follow the program by showing how things used to and how things are now. That's going to be the idea. But again, if you keep looking at their website, they will always say what's new, and it's really, really good. The whole community behind it is really good community. So
it's backed by a small company called Facebook.
Yeah. No, and also like it's a tool that a lot of people use. And it's open source. Like Facebook they put money on it, but a lot of it comes from the community, comes for free. Like people do things for free in the world sometimes. And again, anybody can do changes to it, and a lot of companies, because they use it, they invest a lot of time on it. That's also why it's a really big tool to work with. Of course, if you ask what's the difference between React and Vue and Angular, there is a lot of differences. Why we do React and not Vue and not Angular? Because we cannot learn everything, basically. And once you know one of them, and I'm not going to say really well, because I know it, I work with it every day, and I don't know every single corner of it, I think. I don't know, maybe I never reached it. But once you know, you start to understand how these frameworks use and what they try to solve. And that's basically the main concept of how different they are, is they try to solve the same issue in different ways, basically. And that's something I think I told you a lot of times, that you can solve the same problem in different ways. That's why there is so many frameworks, because they all try to solve the same problem. So yeah, you go to reactjs.org whenever you want, follow the updates. Now, I found this very interesting image about what's the problem I'm talking about that they are trying to solve. On your previous classes, and I found here like JavaScript 2, I think. I was not sure if this was here, but I think I was on this class, that's why I remembered. You guys remember to do something like document get element, and then by ID or by class, I think you could also do that. And then you attach stuff to it, right? You in here, for instance, you set inner HTML. And basically here you are changing the element called result with the ID result. So you are changing the real thing that is on the website, the real markup that when you inspect any website, you are changing this guy here or whatever. And that's fine. But once you want to do a really big application, it becomes really slow, because changing this, what's called DOM, it's really expensive in terms of performance. And there is this, on Chrome, there is this performance tool that I think if you refresh, something happens. You can read about it. It's a bit complicated to use, but you need to record it, right? Yeah. And you can see how different applications, see, it does the whole report of when it renders the HTML, what happens after, the JavaScript gets loaded, changes this, changes that. Exactly what we were doing here, because in here the HTML got rendered with a result tag somewhere, and then we say get this tag and add all this to it, and that's very expensive to do in terms of time, in terms of browser processing. It's by expensive means force, not money, of course. And that's basically what these frameworks, including React, try to solve. This part was also from JavaScript 2, where you had event listeners. So for instance, oh, this element, when you click on it, do this. That element, when you click on it, do that. And again, that's how this becomes. And in here it says jQuery. You probably heard of it. This is how it was to work with jQuery. It was exactly this. You had an event that handles something and then changes the DOM. But then the same event can change other part of the DOM, right? Because when you click somewhere, you want to, I don't know, do something, but then do something else somewhere else on the website. And this is what people call spaghetti code, because everything is mixed. It's really bad. It's terrible to change. It's impossible to test, actually, in terms of writing tests. And yeah, it was an insane time to do things, but we did it, and people survived, and then someone started to think a little bit different. And that's why React came up, and that's why a lot of those frameworks came up, basically. It was, they were trying to solve this problem and put it, as you can see, in a magic box that handles stuff for you. And this is a very non-real, rough explanation of what React does. But you can imagine it's way simpler than it used to be. I found this question on Quora. The question was, what does React actually solve? And this guy actually gives an example, which is basically what I try to do. And it's, again, it's about the DOM manipulation. And by DOM is all the HTML body of it, like the div tags, all that stuff. And that's very heavy and very expensive. And in React, this problem gets solved. There is a lot of controversy about the name React because it's supposed to be reactive, but a lot of people say it's not. I agree with that, but it's really good still. It's really, really good. Because React creates what's called, somewhere here it should be written, a virtual DOM. Yeah, it's here. And basically a virtual DOM is that this HTML you're looking at does not really exist in a page. It exists in React. And then they update it with the page. But that's insanely fast. So when you go to their website and you can see that I have this thing here that actually tells me that their website is using React, I would guess so because they are React, they should use it. And whenever you inspect it, you can see, oh, but all the HTML is here, and it is, but then all this HTML gets, as you can see sometimes when you try to see the source of the website, gets very weird because this is being server-side rendered because they want to be SEO friendly. But in the future, we'll see that once you try to view the source of your code, there will be nothing there. There is no HTML on your code, even though there is HTML when you look at your website. And that's basically what this virtual DOM tries to do. And it's very fast to update. It's very easy to handle events on clicks, on now add this block like we used to do here. And we won't do it this way. It's way, way, way simpler. So yeah, this is a rough explanation of what React tries to do. Basically, it tries to do our life simpler. And again, all the JavaScript frameworks will tell you that, all of them. And they are right in some way. Again, in here is not about being favorite of React or not. It's about actually understanding and solving an issue that we are trying to do. Now, in React, and I won't explain the difference between React and others, but a lot of the thing is React specific, but that's what we're going to learn, so I'll just use the names that React uses for stuff. But in React, usually you build a component, always. And this word, we're going to use it a lot. And a component, there might be some misunderstanding if you talk, for instance, with a backend developer, because in backend, some time ago, components used to be like parts of the system that would handle their own thing. In React, it's exactly the same thing. It's parts of the UI, the user interface, that handle their own thing. And in here, we will try to understand a little bit by looking at some websites, how does a component look like? Yeah, and of course, the idea of components, and this is the very important thing, is to create reusable code. So that, again, you don't write the same code over and over and over again. You remember when you did HTML for the first time and someone asks you to make a list of things and you wrote the first item of the list, the second item of the list, the third, you wrote it like an li in HTML, right? But then when you learn about JavaScript, oh, we have an array. Now we can map through it and append each item as a list. And that's already a bit reusable. And in React, it's exactly that, just written in a different way. And it's not that different, you will see. And like a function that you learn about functions, a component is a function, but it's also a class. But you can give data to it. You can, like any function, you can say like, giving these users, get me the user with the name X. A component is exactly the same. It accepts data as input and handles and can do whatever you want with it, which mostly is going to be printing the data. It's going to put it on a HTML. What else? Yeah, and a component usually returns HTML, and that might be a little bit hard to understand, but it always has to return something, because then that something is going to be used to put on a website. And we will see how that will actually come together. Yeah, this is just to explain, for instance, what a component is. And this is actually a very interesting exercise. It's something that, for instance, I do almost every time that I need to do something visual on a website. Is when you look at the page, and I will try to, yes. I'll just take a print screen of this part here. And now I'll minimize it so that we don't mess up with our viewing. So when you look at this page, you can see that there are some repeated stuff, right? But not repeated words, but repeated elements. For instance, you can see that this, can I use this? Yeah, okay. You can see that, for instance, these boxes, wow. These boxes, they are very similar. So for instance, on a curriculum one, you can decide this is a name, this is a description, this is the amount of stars, this is the forks. Okay, this one doesn't have stars, but it has forks. This one doesn't have forks, but it has JavaScript. So, but this is still very, like, we can share this all across, and we can say like, oh, it can have these ones. So, as you can imagine, for instance, if you would write a function to log data, you could say like, oh, we require a headline, a title, or a name, whatever, and a description, and all this can be optional, right? Because as you can see, like, it can have this, and from what I know on GitHub, it might not even have a fork, so it might be completely empty. So we can actually create only one component, and again, you've done that already in JavaScript 2 or 3 of creating a function that prints one item of a list. So it's no different from here. And again, like this, and okay, the print screen was too short because yeah, just say done. Like that could also apply here on this list, right? Because all of them have this name, this description, whatever. There is a link, right? When you try to click on it. And it would be a little bit crazy to write all these things. And it would be really heavy for the page to write this in a plain JavaScript that says add element to this, add element to that, add element to that. You can think like, but it's the same amount of work actually you have to do by writing. It is, possibly. And actually that's an exercise you can try if you want. Build a page with plain JavaScript without React, with the same exact data, and they should perform a little bit different. I mean, if it's a small page, you should not see that difference because, again, if it's small, it's fast anyway. But if it's a lot of data, then you will see that there is some performance issues on the one that it's plain JavaScript. So yeah, again, regarding the components breakdown, you should of course also look at there is a header here, right, with the title, with the name of the company, in this case, the description, where is it located. So it's very interesting sometimes to actually look at the website and even look at their code, because again, this is all, we are not hacking, we are not doing anything wrong. Even see like how did they broke it down, because for instance you can see like, oh, they have the whole header, right, and then there is an image, and then this is a whole div, and then inside there is another div, and then inside probably, yeah, there is an h1, and there is an empty div, probably because they might have some optional things and they are printing out an empty div for some reason. This actually, it's wrong, but whatever. And this is something that you will have to do quite a lot, is to identify exactly what small parts of the website I need to actually build this header, for instance, or what small parts I need to build these ones. I'm pretty sure, yeah. As you can see, we've broken down as like there is one big repositories thing, and then inside there is a list. You can see there is an li, and then inside something else, which is a div and a div and whatever. Let me drink some water. But as you can probably understand already, it's about identifying and breaking down these small pieces of components. Sometimes you'll find yourself with such a small component that you'll be like, maybe it can do more than one thing, because sometimes if it's too small, it might also be wrong. Because again, if you have a component that only prints headline, that might be a bit crazy to do, I would say, unless you need the same headline in a lot of different places of the website. Then you build that component and then you can reuse it everywhere. But if your headline is only on this, let me select it, only on that box, maybe the headline should be inside of the component and not like its own specific thing, because if we do not use this anywhere else, then it does not need to be so reusable. But there is no rule for that, technically. Again, it depends a lot from developer to developer. Some developers like to have as small as possible. Other developers write a really long file, and I consider that wrong. But if you write a long one and then you start breaking down, it's easy, but it's easier if you break down the design beforehand. Yeah, and of course, these exercises that you can do in any website. You can do on YouTube if you want. They don't use React there, by the way. But it's something really, really interesting. In React, most of the things we would use to render, and the word render will show up a lot as well. Components, if there is a list of something, we will use map instead of for each. For instance, one of the reasons is because map actually returns something. You don't have to, but you should always return from a map, and a for each, usually you don't. You do something else in a for each. That's the only main reason why we will always use map instead of for each. So yeah, now let's actually look at some code instead. And I won't be using any editor. I won't be using VS Code today. Next class we will. Also because I don't know if you used this tool before, but this is free. It's called codesandbox.io, and I will send all these links after, where you already know about node modules, right? What node modules are-ish, and package.json and npm or npx or yarn. I don't know which one you learned, but probably you learned npm.
It was npm.
Yeah.
Node was a little bit of a bumpy ride.
Yeah, but again, that's to manage all the dependencies, and like when you start a new application and you write npm install. If you have a slow internet, it takes forever to do that. If you have a lot of packages, of course. Now this tool does a lot of that heavy work for you. But of course you still need to have internet, but everything happens on a browser. You don't have any code locally, and it's really, really good. You can log in with your GitHub, And if you create some project, you can always host it on GitHub to save it, but it still keeps being saved here anyway. This is really good for prototyping and for trying out new things without the need of installing a lot of packages on your computer. Also because your computer gets slow with a lot of packages because node modules are really, really big. And this tool kind of uses VS Code behind the scenes. So a lot of the shortcuts, a lot of the autocomplete is there. So, and that's really good. As you can see, they actually have, you can, if you want to try other tools, you can try, and they have a lot of support for a lot of things. You can do plain JavaScript, you can do React. But usually if you do React once, then it appears this button here, which basically creates a React application for you. And as you can see, it's here, it's done, and there is a browser here. So we can actually copy this, and it works, and I can actually send it to any of you, and you can access this URL. And whatever changes I do, they will appear here. So for instance, this is very, very, very good for questions and answers. For instance, if you have some question, you can actually write your code here and then send the link and say like, oh, why is this appearing like this, or why is this appearing like that? It's a really, really good tool. So today I will use this, and I think today you'll mostly listen, and then after, like next week, you will actually do some proper work. The colors are a bit weird on the screen. Yeah, but I think it is readable, right? I think so. So, of course, there is some ads because it's a free tool. That's what you get for having free tool. So I created a React application by clicking on a button. Now, whenever I save, stuff happened. It said that I forked the sandbox, and it's here. And actually, I have it on my sandbox, and they give it an automatic name, but I'll give it week 1. And now, if I leave this, it's actually here. So it's whatever you do, it's safe. So you can always leave the sandbox and come back. And if you pay attention to this side here, this is basically the files that it creates. Whenever we will create a React application on your machine, it will create the same exact files. And as you can see, there is the package.json, like you've seen before. There is the dependencies, the development dependencies. We won't use this for now. And then there is the scripts. And I'm pretty sure you know what the scripts do. It's like when you write start, usually starts an application, but you can tell it to do whatever you want. But again, in here, you don't need to run any script because the whole setup does it for you. So in React,
can I ask a question?
Yes, yeah, sure.
So just like to understand, the React is independent language or is follow to Java?
No, React is a dependency. As you can see here, we are using React here. And React is a library. It's a JavaScript library.
Okay.
So I'm not sure, but when you did the Node.js, you probably had a library for database to connect to the database, right? That you added as a dependency, something like that. Yeah, and Express. React, it's not the same as Express, but it's the same category. It's a library. It's something that you import to your project.
This web page what you build now, is built usually how we do it, like HTML tag and like that inside, or just?
Yes, we will see how, because that's what React does. In React, again, for instance, when you had the Express app, whenever you import or require Express, I don't know which term you used, but both of them are okay. Whenever you do that, then you have functions you can call on Express. You can say express.server or .get. React is exactly the same thing. You will import React, and then with that you can create the HTML. With the functions, the utilities that the React library gives it to you, then you can create the HTML. Okay. And that's something we will see today. But again, when you start a brand new React application, these two dependencies are basically what you need, because you need React and React DOM. And React DOM, you only use it in one line of your code, which is basically the connection between what React does and your HTML page. This library basically handles all that for you. Like you don't need to worry with that. That's the magic behind it, basically. And this React scripts is to make your life very, very easy, so that you just write npm run start, and then it starts the website. But again, on this tool, we don't need that yet.
I have a question.
Yes.
Which never came up with when we do like when we do it locally, so we download the package and the packages are hosted on our local machine. Now, when you deploy that, and if you require dependencies, will that be hosted on the server, or that's actually going to be pulled from the repository?
It's on the server.
It's on the server. So that means if there's a problem with the repository, then so you're not gonna, the website's not gonna go down because it's missing a connection with.
No,
you know.
no.
Okay.
For instance, npm is basically, I mean, if you search here, React has to be here. Because this is where all the packages for JavaScript usually are. And this is whenever you deploy somewhere, and we will deploy stuff very at the end of this module, but we will deploy to tools that handle all that for us. We don't care about that. We don't do things from 90s. We do things from 2020s now. And usually most of the hosting services, they handle all those dependencies, as long, of course, as they are defined here. Because if you defined it on the dev dependencies, then it's going to say like, oh, this is a development tool. This is for your machine only. So the server will say like, I don't need this, because you're telling me that I don't need this to run. So if your website needs something to actually run on the deployment,
Then the
it
server
should be
will
on the
pull it down
dependencies.
and install it locally on the server.
Yeah, but it has to be on the dependencies, not on the dev dependencies, because that's a development tool. Some servers actually install everything, which is not that good, because that's why you have it as the development one. But again, this is what you need. And and that's part of actually the homework, is for you to figure out the tool that is called Create React App, which does exactly that. It creates a React application, and it installs all the modules that you need, all these dependencies, and it creates these folders that you're seeing here, a source folder and a public folder. And when you expand, source as HTML, and public as HTML, and source as 2 JavaScript files and a CSS file. And this is basically the starting point of every single React application. When you look at the HTML file, it's very, very empty. There is a lot of comments on it that you can always read and then delete. But it's a very, again, as I told you before, you don't really see the HTML because you don't write it on a .html file. You write it HTML on a .js file. And you can see here there is a div ID root empty, completely empty. Now, if you go to the index.js, here is exactly where I told you that we will use this React DOM. So again, I don't know, from what I saw from your code, usually you do const type React equals require. You would do something like this, right? This is valid. It's not a problem. And this is a lot about the versionings. If you heard about the ES 17 and ES 15, and that has to do with the years that people agreed on new conventions about JavaScript, basically. This one works in every browser, or I think all the browsers handle it. That's the reason why when you write pure JavaScript, you usually use require. But React handles all that for us. We don't need to care about typing things that browsers need to understand, because that's also one of the good things of React. So we write like this. We import React from React.js, and again, from React. And again, this is exactly the same thing, does the same thing. And in here, as you can see, we import this app from app. And as you probably know, this app is actually this file here that we will see after. Now, what I told you that it's very expensive to fetch an element and then put things into that element. In here, we only do it once. And that's what basically we do in React, is that we are getting this root that is basically on this HTML. And we are saying on this root, and that's what we need this React DOM for, we say render whatever comes from this app into that place. And that's the only thing you need on your index.js for now is this amount of code. And then everything else happens on the rest of the files. And again, this is usually the standard that people do that. If you go to the classes, some classes have the whole application in one place. As you can see, like there is a component here, and then in here we are rendering, and this is just to have an overview of the entire code, basically. So now let's see what it is inside of this app.js. One thing that you will, if you create a lot of components, you should also create a lot of files, technically. And you'll get really, really tired of writing this sentence because you need that in every single one because you want to use React. So you always have to import React from React, import React from React. That's something that, for instance, I already have automated. Every time I create a new file, it just puts it there. It's easier, but because you'll probably need it when you're developing a React application. And this is a very simple component. As you probably also had this part. I think you guys did exports dot and then the name of the function, something like that. Again, that's the other convention. This one, you will export, and then space whatever you want to export. So, for instance, if we have a variable here, this, if we want to export this one, we can either do this, and now we can use this variable anywhere else where we import this file, or we can export part. I think then we need to do this variable. No, it's actually export variable. Oh, it's because we are already export default here. Yeah, true. Yeah, this one actually takes over because we are on the index. In here, we are just saying import whatever it's inside of app, and what's inside of app, it's exporting default app. That's why we cannot write another export. Yes?
If there's a default, means that the other export will not be exported, cannot be used?
It can be used like this. So this one is being imported default, and this one is being imported as it is, but it has to be in brackets. And we will see that actually the React package does that all the time. Whenever we import React, it imports the default. But then sometimes you need to import a specific thing from the React package, so then you do this this naming as well. So it would be the same here that we want to do. So now, as you can see, there is some, again, this is a JavaScript file, right? But there is HTML inside, and okay, now I closed it, but there is no strings around the HTML. There is no plus when you have to concatenate HTML. There is no nothing. You just write pure HTML, and that's called JSX because it makes sense. And that's something that React, I think it's only React that uses JSX. I'm not sure, but I think so. But that's basically allows you to write HTML inside of JavaScript so that you don't have to separate the two. Other frameworks do that. In React, you don't have to. You write one inside of the other, or together, basically. So you can have, again, this is a function, as you know, and it's returning. As I said before, it always has to return something, because if we do not return, then it fails, nothing happens, because we are importing something and there is nothing to show from there. So we always have to return. And in here, you can do whatever you want as a regular JavaScript And probably, yeah, this also shows the console. And as you can see, it shows, can I move this? No, okay, whatever. But this is plain JavaScript, and you can write other functions in here. You can write whatever you want. So the logic and the HTML, again, should be in the same component. So if a component needs some sort of logic to do their own thing, it should be there. So now, back to the program. Where were we? We talked about components and JSX. And yes, in here we mentioned the React DOM render. Now we'll go back to components just to explain how exactly these components work. How do we actually do it? Actually, let me just see. As you can see here, the HTML is completely empty. It's exactly the same HTML that I showed you. There is no div there. But when you look in here, there is something there. And actually, if you look at this one, if you inspect and look at the elements, it gets rendered here. So it has to appear here. But when you look at the source code, it's not there. And this is exactly the difference between DOM and virtual DOM, basically. There is ways, again, to render it and put it here. And once you build a real live application, you should, because it's needed to actually have it here. But that's a whole different problem. We don't care about that right now.
So now mostly all the websites like with the application, mostly.
What do you mean?
Like they don't build it like in normal way how we learned it before, like HTML and
Oh no, no, nobody does that. No, nobody does that.
Okay.
The way that it works is that you use a tool that builds that HTML for you, like that pretty HTML, which it does not become pretty. It becomes quite ugly and unreadable, but that's okay because it's the browser that has to read the HTML. We don't care how it looks like. So we write inside of JavaScript in very separate places, and then it gets translated to this, and then it gets translated to this, but the browser takes care, and all the browsers can take care of all this.
Okay, so now mostly all the website, like Facebook is app now. It's with app.
Yeah, everything is a web app.
Okay. Good to know that.
But again, if you go to other websites, as we saw the React.js website, they do have all the code here. For instance, if we search for this word, no, I didn't copy it. Did I? I copied that part. Yeah, as you can see, the word is actually there. But this is because they render everything on a server, and that's something we won't care for now. We will probably talk about it right at the end, because it's something that it's to enhance your application. That's something you should not care about right now. I'll close all this stuff. So let's see how to write some code. Right now, I'm going to write everything into this file just for visibility and see how it happens, but in the future we won't. And as I talked about, I'm going to write what it used to be and what it is right now, so that you at least have an idea of how things are. So there is two things in React called class components and functional components. So we will just create a my class component, extends component, then render, I think, right? Return, and now we'll write a small div here. So now, and as you see up there, we are importing React default, and because we need this component word to actually have access to all the React keywords, it imported automatically up there. But you can also do this. You see this a lot in our documentation, which is basically exactly the same. It's saying React.component, and this you probably should already know. But I like it like this. It makes it prettier. Now, we have this component here. What can we do with it? So the way that it works is that this whole thing can be used as an HTML looking tag. It's not HTML, but it looks like it, and that's the JSX part of it. So if we go up here, by the way, if we change anything here, it changes automatically there because we are running this server. And it will be the same when you run locally on your machine. So I'll just delete all this stuff and write welcome to React, right? And now to add that component, this is the only thing that we need. So I will try to explain what happened here. So this is HTML, as you know, and I actually forgot this part, but you never wrote class name before. You used to write class equals and then a class. But React has their own naming for those type of things, that it gets translated to class when it gets rendered. It's just that when you want to apply a CSS class, it's class name that you need to do. But this is real HTML, so it has all the properties that you know, like all the ID equals class, or in this case class name equals width, height, style, all those things. You can use it here. You can also use it on the H1. Now this is not an HTML, but we don't know this from anywhere. So basically what this does is that it tries to find, are we importing something with this name? No, we're not. Is there something with this name somewhere here? There is a class component, and it is a React component because we are importing this. And then these class components have this render function that basically returns, and then this return is no different than this return. It returns HTML. And as you can imagine, we can create another class component, and this one can return that one, and that one, and that one. And that's basically how you will build the UIs, is by creating small components that return other components and do some logic about and whatnot.
It's like building Lego, no pun intended.
It is exactly like that. Now, this, again, is the old way of doing components. And as I talk, there is class component and functional components. But functional is also old. It's just that nowadays everything is functional components. So a function component, we use it usually as a const, because again, you don't really change the value of it, you change the items inside of it. So it's, I think it's similar to an array. An array can be a const and you can still change what's inside of the array, but the string you cannot change if it's a const. So for functions, we will do this. So functional component equals return and now it's exactly the same thing I told you before, that it gets rendered here, and as you can see, it got printed there. Now, one thing you can, which one of them? Usually when you write HTML, as you know, you open the tag and then you close the tag, right? And as you can see here, I'm not closing this tag, but I'm doing the same as, I think it's image that does that. That you can close the tag on itself because there is nothing inside of it. So it's exactly the same that it's happening here. That's why I'm closing it. If you would do this, it's completely acceptable. It's just stupid. That's why when you save it, it actually I didn't remove it. It's the tool that removes it. So in your VS Code, probably this will also happen. So if you do this, your tool will say, no, then there's no way, no sense to do that. Mm-hmm. So that's why it closes it here. Now, this, I'm not sure if this is new for you, the way that this function is being written,
The arrow function?
the arrow function, that's not new? You learned that?
Yeah.
Yes, okay, cool. Because, yeah, it's the same thing as a function, non-arrow function with a function word. So if you say function, my other component, and then return div here, and then we added here. It's the same thing. I will use this because I like the arrow function. I don't know. I think it's prettier, and it doesn't use the word function. That's me. So I won't be using this one. Yeah. Now, the component you cannot. Oh yeah. One thing I should explain also. I'll just create another one. On the function component, if we do this, we don't really need the keyword return. Okay, that went
It's only one.
all the way there. Maybe I will hide this part, right? We don't need this here, no? Cannot hide, okay, whatever. So if a component only really returns one thing, or even, again, a div can have a lot of stuff inside. So if there is a lot of stuff inside of the div, you can still also write it like this. You don't need the return keyword on it. This is completely acceptable. Like, okay, this is actually printing the same exact thing, but it's completely acceptable to write this.
Because anyway, the R was being returned.
Yeah, exactly. So usually you would write return if there is some logic here, if there is some console log or map or whatever happening before the return. But again, it's preferential. It's not like a standard or anything. I kind of like to write the return because sometimes I'm not sure if there's going to be logic there or not. So, but it's completely up to you to decide. To decide it. As I told you before, a component can return its own data, but it can also return another component. What it needs, and now we'll break it a bit. So we open div, we close div, and now we want to return my functional component as well. So we will just try, and this will say, and actually, usually the errors in React are easy to understand, usually. So basically, it's saying that all the JSX elements have to be wrapped, which means that you cannot return more than one element in a row. You cannot, like what I'm doing here, cannot be done. But for instance, this can be done, right? We are returning a lot of elements up here. It's because this is wrapped in one parent element. So for instance, and you know, like having a div and another div is completely legal in HTML. It's okay. There is nothing wrong with it. But in here, there is a lot of things wrong with it. You cannot do that. So usually what you do is that you write a div around it. Oh, sorry, because and it usually needs to be wrapped in a parenthesis as well. Yeah. So if you write a div around the whole thing, then it's completely valid. And as you can see, we are printing welcome to React, then class component, but the class component is printing this plus that, and then we are printing functional component again. That's why in here we have these two.
Is the div the most common element that is used with React?
No,
No?
because there is a very special thing that you can do, which is this, which is an empty tag. This is completely, it's not HTML at all, but it saves you from having an extra div on your rendered version, which sometimes, again, as you know, by styling, if you say, oh, whatever is inside of here, put red. But then if there is a div around it, then the other ones might not get it, or like the styles can be a bit messed up. So for that, you can use an empty tag. And this is completely valid. It renders completely fine.
What would happen when you render the empty tag? Is just collapses or disappears?
Disappears.
Disappears.
Yeah. So for instance,
So
now
that's the most common thing used in React.
I wouldn't say the most common, but one of them, yeah. So for instance, now if we inspect what we just did, so we have, as you can see, h1, div, div, div. But before, Control Z, save. So now, if we refresh, is it there already? So now, as you can see, there is h1, and then there is a div that wraps those two, and then another div. So this can make your HTML a bit more, and I mean, we just looked at the one from GitHub, and there was a lot of divs inside of divs inside of divs, and that can create that. Sometimes you might want that, and that's completely fine. But because, for instance, if you want to give it the class name, then you need a div. You cannot give a class name to an empty thing because it won't be anything when it gets to HTML. It won't be rendered as any HTML tag. So if you wanted to have properties, then you need a div, or mostly a div, because that's what it's used for. But if it's just to render whatever is inside, then I would say that this is better because it gets a cleaner output. It won't.
When you write class name, it's rendering as class name or just class like usual?
It's just class. It translates it to class.
And what about ID?
It's ID as well. ID is used as ID. It's just class name. The word class probably is not allowed somewhere in a React application. I'm not sure why they chose that, but they might have a good reason for it.
Maybe because you write also class down.
Yeah, but class is a keyword in programming languages, so probably cannot be used as a parameter. That I think that might be probably the reason. Okay, so again, both of these are components. Both of them are React. Both of them return JSX. It is okay if you say returns HTML. Some people say that that's a no-no, but it is okay because it is HTML.
So what if you, on the last one, what if you just put an empty tag instead of the div?
This probably is gonna give us some sort of weird thing because it's just gonna be an empty text somewhere on a website. Like it does not belong anywhere. It will probably belong to the parent div. I'm not sure. Yeah, it just appears there. So you should try not to do that. Again, this helper is really good when you need to wrap a lot of HTML tags. But as you see on the one that actually, this was created by when React initiated, this one was not empty because it has this, and actually I did not explain, but in here we are importing styles.css. So if we open this one, it's not possible to control open, but we can open here. In here you can do, come on, seriously? In here you can do whatever CSS you want to do. As you learned before, you can write whatever you want, and then you just need to import it here, and you can use it in a class name. So if we,
so you can use flexbox and grid. And
yeah, you can use whatever you want here, and it gets, because we are importing the CSS to the page. We are saying this CSS, put it on a page. You don't need to import it manually on your HTML. As you can see here, there is no import CSS anywhere. It just React handles all that trouble for you.
Then it gets a little more tricky because now if you're doing like flexbox and grid and all that, so you have to think about, well, this element goes in here and the element goes in there. And
you just need to think about if there is a parent and the children, and if you put flexbox on a parent, all the children will get affected by it.
Yeah.
But then again, if the children have a lot of divs, all those divs will get affected by it. So, I mean, yes, there is a bit more of a, you need to be aware of what you're doing, but you don't need to be aware of, did I include the right styles? Did I include it? Like, That's all handled by the tool. That again, you get new problems. Not everything is solved, but it becomes a bit easier to develop, and you can concentrate on actually code and logic. That's the thing of these React tools or any other tools, is for you to concentrate more on what's needed for the thing to run, and less do I have the right thing? Is the HTML file pretty? Like, no, it's completely empty. There is nothing there, so you don't need to worry with that. Now, another thing from here, and I know it's being talked down here, but we kind of need to talk it because of this, is about values. Because as we talked about, this is a function. This one is not a function, right? But this is a function. And like any function, we can say name, right? Mm-hmm. And then console log name. But now when you see, oh, it's completely empty, right? Now, how do we give parameters to this, right? Because we have, like, this is not a, we are not calling it as like a my functional component. We are not doing this, right? We are not sending a string here. This is not valid. So the way that it works is that this JSX creates properties like HTML, exactly. So now here we actually can say, and actually when you start to type, it appears, we can say name equals, and when you look here, now there is a name there.
Like an object or something like that?
Yes. It passes to the component by giving, of course, that then it needs to match. If we actually do this, it gives the value of it, because before we were just passing it, so it's just an object name. So if we actually want the name, we need to say name.name, right? To get the actual value of it. But and I don't know if you guys also learned that, but in JavaScript you can do this, and basically gives you the value of the key, right, of name, and this is completely valid, as you can see. And now there's still an undefined here because this one is not passing anything. So if we now on this one pass this, so now we have this name and then we have this name, because we are calling the component here and then we are calling the component here again. So as you can see here, we are already reusing this component for the same thing, and thus giving the different parameters, of course, does different stuff. But now, how do we use this name? Like, because we want to show the name, we want to say, hi, my name is, and now we want to use this name value. The way that we do that is by using the brackets. And it's not the same thing we are doing here. It's two different ideas. And as you can see, it got printed there. Now, these brackets can only be used inside of tags, inside of a div tag, or an empty tag, or a span tag, or whatever. But if we do this here, this probably is going to give us, oh yeah, this still gives us, because it's still a valid object, right? But this is the way to actually print it inside of the value of something inside of the HTML. So for instance, if now we have name,
so this one, when you hook that up with the database, so what you do is, like, you do the query on the database and validation and authentication and all that, and then you set a let's say a name over there, and whoever logs in gets their name back.
Yeah, and then you pass it to the component as a regular HTML tag. So, and of course, you can add as many as you want. If your component has a lot of inputs, that happens at some point. It will happen, but it might be a bit bad because it will become very hard to write it and to see everything, like exactly what's happening. But as you can see here, there is no string concatenation. There is no this string plus that string. You can just write this part and then write your variables, and they will get printed as the values you gave to.
It's like the template string without the dollar sign.
Yeah, it is called template string. And actually, it works if you wrap it in a quote marks and use the dollar sign. It works the same as well.
Anything you want it to be up, you should put in the default class or default.
What do you mean?
Like everything you write down will not show up in the page if you don't put it in the default class or default function. The export default.
Oh, yeah. You mean, for instance, if we do this, that.
I mean, like if you want something to show in the map in the.
Oh, in the main page.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It should be.
Yes, it has to be somewhere here, or for instance, let's say we don't write this one here now. The age, this component down here, still appears because we are calling it from here. So you don't have to define everything in the main export. Actually, this one can be completely empty. And then it renders this one, and then this one can render whatever he wants, and then that one can render whatever they want. And then it goes all the way up to the tree and says, yeah, print all this stuff to the browser. So no, you don't have to define them here. I'm just doing it here because then we can see it like as a structure. But for instance, we can actually do this, and it still works. So the default one only renders my class component, and then my class component renders this plus 2 times this component, and this component does not render any other component. So this is completely valid. You don't have to put them all here. That's completely fine. Okay, so, and will this be updated? Yeah, sure. And these parameters here is what you will hear about props. That's what they are called, which I think it's short for properties. I don't know. But it's, yeah. So basically, you always, if your component requires data, you give it as props. Now, a class component, that can also happen. I just need to remember how to write it. It's, I think, let's just console log it. I think it's this one. Oh, it has to be inside of the render because, again, I'm not sure how much time you guys spend in learning classes and constructing classes, but this has all the properties of a class. And the class, you cannot just write things here. You need to write things inside of methods and stuff like that. And usually when you have a class, you have a keyword called this, which means like this class. So, for instance, when I log the props, there is nothing. But if I log this only, then there is a lot of stuff. And a lot of them is just object. So you can see there is props, context, and refs. And we will, during the course, we will talk about all of it. But now we only care about props. And this works exactly the same. So if we say name equals, or not name, cd equals, so as you can see here, it shows, and this is this one, it's my class component. So it is exactly the same. So if we say now cd here, if it's misspelled, yeah. And the way to render it, it's the same. Now I'll actually write another div. And say I live in, no, this one. So as you can see here, now a class component can also have props. It's just that we access them in a different way.
Yeah.
And as you can imagine, it is a bit tricky because you don't necessarily have to define them anywhere. Here, like in here, you have to say exactly what this function needs. But on this one, you don't really have to say that. And that might be a little bit of a problem because you don't really know what exactly it requires when you're looking at the component. You know only when you're seeing like, oh, you're using a prop called city, so probably I need to give you that prop. And this might be a bit tricky to work with. There is tools that helps you doing that, and we will learn that, but we will also learn a different way of writing components that this won't be needed.
Do you have to write like this dot props dot whatever?
Yes, because it is a class component.
Okay.
So it's like before when we learned the class, we learned like for this name and it's like equals something.
Mhm.
Instead that we should use purpose.
Yeah. But of course you can always assign it to something else. So you can always say that city equals this dot props dot city, and you can do it up here. So then now you only use the word city on it. You don't.
Okay.
You can always assign the value to something else. So for instance, here now we printed Odense, and we are doing two different things. It's just the same exact value. In here we are saying, give this value to this variable. But again, this is a bit of a tricky way of doing things.
It can only have one method, which is render. Or you can also add-
No. That's actually or that used to be the big thing about class components, is because there is something called lifecycle. And lifecycle is certain steps that happens while something is happening. So for instance, the page is loading, your component is mounting. That's the name that it's used. And then by mounting means all the properties are being rendered, everything is happening. When that is done, your component is mounted. So you have methods here that you can actually catch. Which ones are they now? Console.log. I need to search for them because I don't use them. No, it's the mount component will mount. This one usually oh yeah, this one we can actually not even call it. Component did mount, will mount, did update. Yeah, this one works. Let's get this one. It only shows that component mounted because nothing is trying to update the component. And we will see what does this mean. And basically, all these methods are so that you can control, for instance, a click event. When you click, you want something to happen. And before, you would say to add an event listener. In here, you'll still do the same, but you cannot add an event listener without the component being there. Because if this div is not there, and as you can see here, is not.
Yes.
So you need to wait for the JavaScript to be there. And that's why there is all these life cycles that you see, like now it's mounted, now I can give it an event listener. Now I can say whenever someone clicks, does this. And then if that, whenever someone clicks, does this, if that triggers something on the component, for instance, it changes some data here, then the component updated. So when that happens, then you can do something else. And as I don't know if you're there now, but what I'm saying now starts to seem a lot like jQuery used to be, right? With a lot of when this happens, does that, but when that happens, does that. And it can be a bit tricky if you have a lot of logic here, then you're doing something wrong. Then there has to be a simpler way to do it. But
Now, what if
yes.
you, let's say you know, a component like a button mounted, but that button is going to call another component that's not mounted yet. What would happen in between? In between, I'm clicking that button, and so nothing will happen then because
No.
the other component is not mounted.
Yeah. But that's something almost impossible to happen because it's like a very small amount of time. This is just so that you do not attach an event to something that is not there yet. But once that is there, the event will be attached. It's just probably you learn a timeout, right?
Yeah.
That it's waiting for some time. This is not really a timeout, but you can imagine as it is like I'm waiting. Like, is this there yet? No. Okay, then I'm gonna wait. And then once the button is there, now I can attach the event listener.
That's because all the code it's loaded on the virtual DOM, so that's why it happens faster.
Yeah, it happens really, really fast. Again, if you have a lot of components and a lot of logic, then it might be a bit slow. But again, you won't see those errors happening. You would just see that the functionality is not there yet, but it will once everything is loaded. Now I would actually like to talk about state after break. So let's find something else to talk about. Now, what I've been mentioning about this is the old way of doing, and this is the new way of doing. Now, the new way of doing is functional. Like there is no special keyword, there is no special anything. It's just that we used to write components like this because of the life cycles, because of this and this, so that we could actually access that specific time, like now the component will update, so I need to do this. Now the component mounted, I need to do that. But that's going to be, that is available on functional components as well. It is a bit, I cannot say hard to understand because it becomes like it's way less code, because as you can see, right now, let's just remove this from here. We will talk about that later. But these two components, they do almost the same thing, right? They have a div. Okay, this one renders the other two. But as you can see, like this one needs a render and a return and whatever. And this one only has a return. It's way cleaner. And you can actually even write it without the return, as we saw. You can, even if it has props, we can do this. So essentially, and that's not the reason, but your components becomes a bit smaller as well. You can write this, it's just not, okay, now this is going to be a lot of H stuff. Yeah, I think this is the last one to be printed. I'm not sure now. Let's just, we are not printing the H or the name, but we can do, we can say name equals this, and then say name, right? Now this appears here and here. We can write a very short amount of code, and this one we have to write all this stuff that becomes a bit useless because now we don't need it to actually access the component will mount, component did update, component whatever. Life cycle. Where is it? Yeah, okay. Yeah. So as you can see here, there is component did mount that we looked at, component did update, component will mount, component did catch, and these are the lifecycle events that we need to do something. For instance, and you guys learn like how to fetch data from an API or how to create an API. So before, you would have to wait for this to be there so you could actually populate it with some data. Because if the parent is not rendered yet, then you cannot put data into it. You cannot give it anything. So you would use those life cycles to say like, oh, wait a little bit. If it's mounted, then you can fetch all the data from the API and give it to the component as properties, as props. And that was the main reason why that used to be.
The let's say the development from the old way to the new way, is that only software related, or it's also because of the advancements of hardware related, or both?
No, it's software. It's a different way of doing things. They just created a different way, basically. And it's a very interesting one. But I think we will make a small break now, if you guys agree.
Ah, okay.